Why are suicides happening more? You can search in the news for 2022. Suicides in the United States reached an all-time high. Almost 50,000. It will be good if we can reduce suicides to zero using persuasion, reason, and kindness. I would love it if living on Earth could be so awesome that no one wants to leave. That seems quite ideal. There are no causes of suicide. There are only reasons for suicide. Medicalizing suicide can have unintended consequences. Psychiatric coercion can have unintended consequences. Ruthless capitalism can have unintended consequences. And keep in mind, if you look up the news stories for the record high number of suicides in 2022, this likely does not take into account deaths from drug overdoses that were reported as being likely accidental, which may or may not actually be accidental. Perhaps political systems should be more compassionate. Social systems should be more compassionate. How do you think that reason, persuasion, and kindness could be applied to help reduce the reasons individuals have for engaging in suicide? I believe that is a worthwhile question. Medicalizing suicide can have unintended consequences. The idea of mental illness, embracing the idea of mental illness, can have unintended consequences. Read the book Suicide Prohibition by psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. Suicide Prohibition, The Shame of Medicine by psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. Read the book Fatal Freedom, The Ethics and Politics of Suicide by psychiatrist Thomas Szasz. Again, I hope we can reduce suicides to zero using persuasion, reason, and kindness. Could an over-reliance on psychiatric druggings be causing problems? Because of how the Federal Reserve works, in many ways we really don't have a free market. We have a controlled market. Unlimited money printing can have unintended consequences. According to psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, psychiatry is more involved with economics and politics rather than being an objective branch of medical science. According to psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, psychiatry is scientistic rather than scientific. Scientistic means something might sort of look like science, but really is not science. And if psychiatry really is more economics and politics in a branch of the law more than objective medicine, what are the implications of that? Especially considering the Federal Reserve can effectively print unlimited amounts of American dollars. Printing unlimited amounts of money can cause inflation. Inflation can make it harder to afford goods and services. Not being able to afford goods and services can result in problems in living. According to psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, psychiatry is the medicalization of problems in living. Psychiatry can be the medicalization of social problems, political problems, economic problems, spiritual problems, so on and so forth. So, if we do want to make Earth a decent place to live so that nobody is motivated to engage in suicide, how can we do that? I personally see the medicalization of suicide as a barrier to having Earth be better and reducing potential motivations that those might have for engaging in suicide. So seeing psychiatry for what it is can be important. Suicide is not actually illegal, but suicide is effectively illegal. What I mean by that is, if an adult attempts to engage in suicide or states that they are going to, they can be locked up in a psychiatric unit and have non-consensual psychiatry inflicted on them. They may be coerced, they may be effectively jailed, and according to psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, psychiatric coercion and non-consensual psychiatry are human rights abuses. The psychiatric survivor movement exists for good reasons. Try to learn about the psychiatric survivor movement, aka the CSX movement, Charlie Sierra X-ray, CSX, Consumer Survivor Ex-Mental Patient Movement. Non-consensual psychiatry can be extremely traumatizing for those who it is afflicted upon. According to psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, involuntary mental hospitalization is a crime against humanity, and non-consensual psychiatry is effectively a form of torture. Now, if you think that waterboarding is torture, rather than just an enhanced form of interrogation, if waterboarding is a form of torture, then non-consensual psychiatry seems to be another form of torture, effectively. Someone can voluntarily receive a tattoo, and that is a contracted commercial service involving art. If one was to non-consensually receive a tattoo, that could be a form of torture. Having a needle put into one's skin repeatedly for hours and hours. Tattoos can sometimes require hours and hours of needling. So when a tattoo is voluntary, it's an art procedure. But if a tattoo is involuntarily, it's arguably a form of torture. Both myself and psychiatrist Thomas Szasz believe that consensual, voluntary psychiatry should remain legal. I support the right of adults to receive voluntary consensual psychiatric services if they want to. And if you actually read what psychiatrist Thomas Szasz wrote, if my memory serves me, he said something like the following. He was not for shutting mental institutions down in the 60s. He was for opening them up so they were voluntary and did not involve forced druggings. And just so you know, both psychiatrist Thomas Szasz and psychologist Bonnie Burstow believed that child psychiatry was, in the case of Thomas Szasz, a form of poisoning. In the case of Bonnie Burstow, a form of child abuse, child psychiatry. So I do hope that we can reduce suicides to zero using persuasion, reason, and kindness. I do believe that socio-political problems require socio-political solutions. And to try and utilize pseudo-medical solutions to socio-political problems, that's going to fail. It's been failing, and it's going to keep failing. So hopefully more individuals will wake up to the idea that medicalizing problems in living is a really bad strategy if we want to make this earth a decent place to live. Psychiatrist Thomas Szasz wrote about 35 books, so until new strategies are tried, I unfortunately won't be surprised if the number of suicides keeps increasing. Again, I hope we can reduce suicides to zero, non-consensual psychiatry should be outlawed, voluntary psychiatry should remain legal.